Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now if you want to get into PC gaming, I always recommend putting a PC together yourself from scratch. It's the best way to get a good understanding of the parts, and once you've done it, well, you'll never go back to buying a pre-built again. That said, I do like buying second-hand pre-builts from time to time. Reason being is that you can find them pretty cheap and they're just fun to mess around with. Now obviously I'm in a bit of a different position. I buy these things to play around with, perhaps upgrade and see what's inside them. But if you're looking at getting a PC either for the first time or you have less to spend and you want something that's already assembled, well, there are plenty of machines to choose from. And this Dell Inspiron 5675 is one of those options. Now I paid £140 for this thing, probably a little bit too much given the specs, but it's all relative. These seem to hold their value quite well. It arrived a little bit dusty, but that's nothing that we aren't used to here on this channel. And today I want to talk about it because there are certainly a few quirks, i.e. annoyances, with this thing that I wanted to discuss. So this is probably one of the best looking Dell machines ever created. I think, in my opinion anyway, outside of some of the Alienware systems, this one looks really good. My mum actually had one of these. We reviewed it a few years ago, the 5675. She had a Ryzen 3 1200 and an RX 560 inside her one. This isn't too different. In fact, when I went on the Dell website and typed in the service tag, these were the exact specs that this thing had originally when it shipped from the factory, but things have changed ever so slightly. So opening it up, and you can see that we do have a stock cooler on here, and sure enough, there's a Ryzen 3 in here. The 1200 is alive and well inside this second-hand Inspiron 5675. For the RAM, we have 16 gigs of 2400 MHz DDR4, nothing special here, and it seems as though the graphics card has been upgraded. We now have a GTX 1060. Now fortunately this is the 6GB model, so it's going to be a lot more capable in modern games, which I would always advise purchasing over the 3GB one in 2025 if you're going to get a 1060, that is. So before we get into the gaming capabilities of this aging machine, I want to talk about a few of the little cons and quirks that you might find inside one of these systems. So the 5675 was replaced by the 5676 not too long after this one, and the reason being is that this machine doesn't support anything higher than the first generation Ryzens. I think you can go up to an 1800X, but you can't actually use a second gen CPU in this thing, for example a 2700, because the motherboard doesn't support it. It did receive a BIOS update a couple of years ago to fix some security vulnerabilities, got that word right first time surprisingly, but it didn't actually add support for a newer Ryzen CPU. If you wanted a newer second gen Ryzen, you'd have to buy the 5676. Interestingly, the 5676 motherboard is basically the same thing, just with a later iteration of the BIOS, so you can't upgrade to a second gen Ryzen, and I confirmed that with my testing, so the best we can use is an 1800X, and we'll be upgrading to that at some point in the near future. The funny thing is though, when I was looking at the spec sheet for the 5676 Dell, you can use the Ryzen 5 1400 in that, which is strange because you can use the 1400 in the 5675 as well. So the later one is backwards compatible, but this one isn't compatible with newer chips, even though it's the same socket because of the BIOS limitation. Basically, that's what it seems to be. We also need to talk about RAM. Now this came with 16 gigs of DDR4 at 2666 MHz. Now there's no option for overclocking the memory, no XMP or Expo. Now at least this one actually had 2 sticks of RAM. I think when my mum bought hers years ago it had one 8GB stick, and I think this one did originally according to the spec sheet, but someone sensible has actually upgraded it over the past few years. Maybe they did so straight away. Now this is running at 2666 as I mentioned, and this system will support 32GB of memory because a few people were saying different things on some of the forums I checked, but 32 gigs works fine. I stuck my Corsair DDR4 RAM in here, rated at 3200 MHz, and when I turned the system on it only ran at 2133, and of course there's no option in the BIOS to enable any memory overclocking, so we were stuck at that speed. So that's a bit of a shame as well. Now you're probably thinking, well, at least it's got a GTX 1060 running in here, right? And I'm sure that's going to run at its full potential. wrong. Now, of course, we have the CPU bottleneck to contend with. The Ryzen 3 1200 is going to severely limit the GTX 1060, at least in most modern games, but aside from that, it's not actually running at its max rated speed. Now, the 1060 is a PCIe 3.0 x16 card, meaning that it will run with 16 PCIe lanes in any normal system. Here, it uses just 8, so it will run in PCIe X8 mode, albeit with 3.0 speed. So, yeah, it's something that I noticed on my Alienware Aurora i9 as well. Although that had a full-size PCIe slot, it only ran with 8 PCIe lanes, meaning that any graphics card you stuck in there ran in X8 mode. Now, this isn't a huge deal with a card like the 1060 6GB, but yeah, just something else worth pointing out. So far we've got a system that is limited to first gen Ryzen, that won't allow you to tweak your memory, and that won't let your GPU run at its maximum potential. It's shaping up to be an absolute banger of a system, a true brilliant buy in 2025. Still, we aren't completely limited as to what we can do with this thing. As I mentioned, we'll be upgrading it at some point in the future to an 1800X that will hopefully work, and a more powerful graphics card that will suit said CPU. So all of this is powered by a 460 watt power supply. I think there were a few different options available. For the storage, we have a 256GB M.2 SSD, which luckily the operating system was installed on Windows 11 out of the box. Interestingly, this has been upgraded. Now, I don't think this PC is supposed to support Windows 11 officially, but it seemed to work just fine when I fired it up. This is accompanied by a 1TB hard drive. This is actually a laptop hard drive, which from what I can tell was standard from the factory. So yeah, it's running an SSD and a laptop HDD. I don't think we'll be installing any games on that in 2025, although there are 2 M.2 slots, so we can just add a secondary SSD in here, which I think would be the better bet. Or we can get a cheaper 2.5-inch SSD and replace the laptop hard drive with that. I tell you what though, doesn't this thing look good? I mean, you power it on, the whole thing lights up blue. There's a bit of a weird delay, like you press the power button and then the system comes on, and then the lights come on 2 seconds after that, and you think, oh no, the lights are broken, surely this time it's not going to work, and then ping, blue. So yeah, it looks the part, it looks really nice actually. As I said, this is one of my favourite Dell designs. I don't think there's anything else I'm missing. Oh, there is a DVD drive, but it's a laptop drive, so you know, you press it to eject it and it just goes like a laptop just pings out slightly. Yeah, nothing wrong with that really. There is space for a standard DVD drive underneath that. There seems to be the bay for it inside the case anyway. I don't think many people have the need for discs these days. I do though. I like to collect older physical PC games. It's nice to have the physical disc, but there we are. So let's try gaming as is with this thing, with the Ryzen 3 1200 and GTX 1060 6GB. Now the Ryzen 3 is a 4-core, 4-thread CPU. As part of this Dell Inspiron 5675, it will reach its maximum clock speed in games. That's 3.1 GHz on all 4 cores. It's no surprise really, considering this is relatively low power and it runs nice and cool. The puny looking stock cooler is actually more than capable of keeping this thing cool here. This thing's going to deliver at least 30 FPS, but because the CPU is the bottleneck as part of this setup, and it is throughout the entirety of these gameplay tests, you're going to see some pretty horrible dips and drops. In GTA 5 Enhanced at 1080p with a high preset, it's another plus 30 FPS average. The CPU is the letdown here. It actually took a while for all the assets to load in. Everything sort of popped in quite slowly, but once it was there, I didn't have any issues after that. Still, wouldn't really recommend playing on one of these in 2025. This is the same for the legacy version of the game as well. There may be a few texture popping issues and stutters as you play. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was actually quite surprising. Didn't seem too bad at all with the 4-core, 4-thread Ryzen 1st gen chip. 1066GB is more than capable at the lowest settings or the low preset here, but again, the processor is the letdown in this situation, which I think was probably obvious going into these tests. We saw 48 FPS here, however, with a 1% low of 27 and a 0.1% low of 8. Helldivers 2 also ran surprisingly well, albeit at the low preset with 49 frames per second. The 1% low was 24 and the 0.1% low was 17, so it wasn't even that bad in terms of dips and drops here. The same cannot be said for Cyberpunk 2077, which at the low preset, which combines a few low and medium settings, saw 28 FPS overall. The 1% low was 12, and the 0.1% low was just 10, so definitely a few issues. Fortnite ran with 54 FPS on average. It depends on what you're doing really and where you are on the map. Some areas hit at least 60 FPS. It took a while to load in here, but once we were in, performance wasn't as shocking as I anticipated. 54 overall, a 1% low of 17 and a 0.1% low of 9. So yeah, the consistency definitely leaves something to be desired. We'll finalise then with Red Dead Redemption 2, which we can run with the ultra textures on the 6GB 1060. I did however set everything else to the lowest apart from TAA, which was set to high, and the sharpness was turned up about halfway. Here we saw 38 frames per second with a 1% low of 27 and a 0.1% low of 18. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a little more forgiving towards 4-core, 4-thread CPUs. But there we are, the Inspiron 5675. It's one of my favourite pre-builts to look at, but not one of my favourites to actually use in terms of how limited we are when it comes to upgradability mainly. But thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.